Good evening. We'll get started here shortly. Good morning, evening. We will get started here momentarily. Good evening. We'll get started here in about 2 minutes. Good evening as we get started here. Anne had sent a note saying that she will be joining us shortly. She said she'd be happy to take over minutes if anyone wants to take minutes in the meantime. Happily take volunteers. Catherine, do you want to try?
So I'm happy to. The only thing is I'm home solo with 2 sick kids. So there's a very good chance I'm going to have to jump at some point.
Okay.
I can do that if that's easier. It's fine.
Okay, maybe a good idea. And if you have to take care of kids, by all means, priorities, and that certainly would be one. Thank you for joining us for as long as you can, and hope that the kids do get better.
Thank you. And thanks, Tim.
And never fun to deal with sick kids at home. I think it's almost as bad as sick spouses. Sick kids are one thing, having to deal with sick spouse, there's nothing that's ever been as bad. Okay, I've got 7:01. With that, we actually have a quorum here. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 of us. So Now 7. So we've got a quorum. We will start the meeting at 7:01. Tim's going to take the initial minutes. And at some point, Tim, if you'd like to have Ann take over when she eventually joins, you're welcome to pass that on. If you'd like to continue on, that is your choice as well. So I appreciate you taking the minutes. So we've got an interesting agenda for this evening. The first thing you may or may not have noticed, quorum is now down to 5 members as required. One of our members has is no longer a part of the committee due to other bylaws, and with that, I'd like to thank her for her contributions during her time on the committee. So with that, for those of us who are remaining, we've got a lot of work to do. So public engagement, anyone from the public who wishes to speak at this time? Not seeing any. Tom is staying quiet, or did we say that it was supposed to be my lord, Tom? So sorry if you wish to say something at this time, you're welcome to. With that, moving right along to the minutes, and it looks like Ann will be joining in shortly. So Tim, it's up to you if you'd like to continue on or have Ann take over. She said that she'll be happy to do so once she is fully engaged with the meeting itself. So we have two sets of minutes. The first set is actually for the date got printed, unfortunately, incorrectly. The date was November 7th is the first set of minutes to go over. And these were sent out fairly recently. But if everyone has had a time to look at them, they seem to be quite detailed in their nature. Any suggestions, any thoughts as we go into this? Otherwise, we'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes from November 7th.
So moved.
So we've got a motion from Ann to approve the minutes of November 7th, 2022. Do we have a second?
I second.
Catherine seconds. Any discussion, comments? I'd like to mention that the minutes are quite detailed, much appreciated. A lot of good information in there. Upon approval, I will handle any scrivener's issues or requirements that are not material that need to be met, such as in this one. I'm not confident that I saw the date listed on the minutes. I'll add that just for before submission to the town website and to the town clerk. I handle that administratively, usually as a scrivener error type of issue. Any discussion? Okay, with that, we get to go ahead and do vote by roll call, since we are still following the remote meetings protocol. I'm just going to call as people are listed in my particular window. If you'll move around, then roll calls may be different. So first, we've got Catherine for approval of the minutes. Tim?
Yes.
Yes.
Lucy?
Yes.
Joe?
Yep.
Lisa?
Yes.
Kevin?
Yes.
Ann?
Yes.
And I vote in the affirmative. So with that, we have unanimous approval of the minutes of November 7th. Okay, that brings us to the second set of minutes for November 21st. So these minutes also very detailed, much appreciated, have a lot of good information on them, cover information. Unfortunately, Tom, I did not see the references to you having to wear your wig for that meeting, although I do believe that you acknowledge that you were supposed to be doing it. It looks like you've somehow forgotten the frosting today as well. So any comments before we get get into the discussion on November 21st. Do we have a motion to approve the minutes of November 21st as presented?
So moved.
Okay, Ann moves. Do we have a second?
Second.
Kevin seconds. Any discussion on the motion to approve the minutes of November 21st? Okay, with that, I'm going to do roll call again in the order as you appear on my screen. Catherine,
Yes.
Tim,
Yeah, yes.
Joseph,
Yeah.
Lisa,
Yes.
Kevin,
Yes.
Lucy,
Yes.
Ann,
Yes.
and I vote in the affirmative as well. So those are approved by unanimous as well. And again, I will update the approval date and send those on. If you look at the website, you'll see that all of our prior minutes are posted along with meeting videos and so forth as appropriate as well. So moving right along, that brings us into the substance of the bylaws themselves for this evening. We've got a lot of fun stuff up. First, chapter 9, boards, committees, and commissions. We've not received any additional feedback at this time. I have a feeling that this may not appear on the next on meetings going forward unless requested by public bodies and they proactively give feedback prior to a meeting. It's been on the agenda for the entirety of the fall. A couple of notices did go out to all of the public bodies through the town administrator's office, all of the ones that are responsible through the town administrator's office. Those that are appointed by other committees may or may not have gotten notice. It's up to the appointing committee at that point to handle that aspect. So that's chapter 9. Chapter 36, for meetings, we've not heard anything further from Mr. Carroll. After town meeting seemed to run well. The only feedback that we've gotten from Mr. Carroll at this point is that he really likes the idea of not having to do the counts for very small minorities when there's a vote that is, even with 2/3, overwhelmingly in favor, but still allowing for, of course, the ability to have a count upon any 7 members requested. So we've got some existing updates that we've previously discussed. Again, that I don't plan on keeping on the agendas going forward unless there's requests for updates that we find out about in front of a meeting. That brings us to chapter 75, alarms. Okay, chapter 75, just gonna move this down on my screen a little bit, is a rather large chapter, talks about alarms predominantly like fire alarms, burglar alarms, things along those lines. And I did reach out to both the fire chief and the police chief to ask if they had feedback. They had no feedback or recommended changes at this time. The only other information that we were provided from the police chief, Chief Scory, is that there are no known direct calls to the police department. Everything goes through a call center at this time. Years ago, there was the ability to have an auto dialer that would call the police department directly. He's not aware of any of those auto dialers still being in effect. He did not recommend that we remove anything related to that at this time. So with that, we've got the purpose, the definitions. This was updated in 2018 and 2019 with the idea that of who would be responsible for handling the appeals and who would be responsible for the administrators. You'll note some items have been removed. The idea behind removing irrelevant items and just marking it is so that existing printings didn't have to have the bylaws all renumbered just for the sake of renumbering. Any questions? 75, 1 through 4.
Did you reach out to town council for whether there was any feedback on this one, since their body named here as well?
Yes, good
Okay.
question. And town administrator.
Great.
No feedback was received.
This is Bob, one of the town council members. Dan?
Yep.
Can you hear me? The only
We
thing,
can hear you.
yeah, we haven't made any decisions on this yet. The one thing I found interesting, and yeah, of course, I was part of your group in 2018 that made a lot of these changes. But in 75-4, some towns have changed this. For instance, in Stoneham, the select board appoints the town administrator and 2 residents of Stoneham to serve on the alarm appeal board. And so I don't know whether the town council is going to be interested in making any changes to this. I just found it interesting that some other towns have taken the responsibility off of the town council shoulders and placed it elsewhere. In Melrose, which is the city, it's the city auditor. So I can see that there's a move in some areas away from having the town council be the alarm appeal board. I just may discuss it with some of my colleagues, but right now there's no changes to this section. Thanks.
Thank you, much appreciated. Bob, while we've got your attention, are you aware in your duration on the town council, are you aware of any appeals actually coming before the town council or being requested?
Well, none in the 7 months I've been on. And from talking to some of my colleagues, nobody can remember a time when this actually took place. I mean, I would defer to Tom. He knows, the history better than I, but I don't think this has come up in many years, probably.
So I can tell you for the last 9 years, it's never come up. I'm trying to get my picture in, sorry. But we have never had an issue with this or an appeal to my knowledge.
Thank you. The idea behind the appeal is if there's a fine that someone feels they need to, that they want to appeal and get the fine either reduced or waived, that it's who has the authority to do that. So we're going on almost 10 years. Tom, from your prior service, back when it was a board of selectmen and then subsequent service, are you aware of appeals that have been filed or requested?
No, never.
Okay, so we're at that point, we're going back to, well, when powdered wigs were actually, I think, used. Going back a while. Okay, so registration required. This is if there's going to be a alarm device, it has to be registered. Again, I'm not sure how necessary that is to be current where alarms now go through central stations. But if there is one, there's process for it. There may be some buildings that still have legacy alarm hardware in place. And what comes to mind is possibly some of the banks. They might sell legacy direct dials, although I'm not aware of those being used in the incidents that have happened over the last several years. So information should be confidential. Again, no automatic dial alarms can be installed. We don't have any that are known to be in town. 75.9. This is one that affects potentially homeowners and businesses. It's exterior audible devices. If someone does have an alarm, basically you can't have it sound for more than 15 minutes. Pretty much all of the systems that I know of that are reasonably current that have been manufactured in the last 15, 20 years comply with that. You usually have about a 5-minute reset period. Most places don't seem to install exterior alarms any longer. They tend to take a direct contact approach. False alarm charges, if there is a response, done within a calendar year, which is different than fiscal year. If it's the first 2 alarms, there's no charge. After that, it's $25, $25 each. Again, if someone has a problem with it, they can appeal to the appeal board, which in this case would be the town council. Given that it's $25, I'd be surprised if this was actually done at any time in the next several years. It just seems to be a de minimis amount, but enough that it is an effective deterrent from people just setting off alarms without understanding that there are some repercussions. $75, $11, and $12 talks about the appeals board, the process for it. If there's fees, no responsibility of the town. Basically, if there's an alarm and the town doesn't respond, the town is not liable. Violations, penalties is if someone goes ahead, causes an intentional harm, such as they do an intentional alarm, then there are fines, $200. This is I think aimed to reduce people from just pulling false alarms, causing disruption. Nowadays, it's sometimes referred to as swatting. Then we've got 17 through 19 on the enforcement. Anything that says that on town property doesn't apply, and 19 is kind of standard severability clause. Any questions, feedback on chapter 75?
The only other thoughts I had was there is some gendered, like I think it says his at one point, so just to flag it for the cleanup there. And then I'm sure we've talked about this before, but just wanted to ask about when we say a count of days, is it calendar days? Is it assumed or like previously defined as calendar days versus like a business day?
Tom, are you able to talk about the calculation of days? I believe that's handled in chapter 1.
Yeah, I believe that unless the bylaw specifies business days, a day would be a calendar day.
Okay, we probably have already talked about it, so just checking. Thanks. Otherwise, I really like the structure of this bylaw. It was very easy to understand.
Thank you for catching the gender issues. That would be in 7512. Tom, if you can make a note of it.
Yep.
So in most cases, his and her should probably be changed to they, them, more gender neutral. I believe that's the only one in here. Yes, that I could find. Good catch on that. Other feedback? Moving along, alcoholic beverages. Possession and consumption on certain property prohibited. So this one is interesting, and Tom will want your assistance here for interpretation. No person shall drink or possess an open or partially empty container as defined in MGL while on any public way to which the public has right of access, or any place where members of the public have access as invitees or licensees, basically anywhere without the consent of the owner, anywhere in the town without the consent of the owner or person who's in control. And if there is alcohol, it shall be seized and safely held until it's the issue is done, in which point then it can go back to the person, presumably for consumption outside of court or wherever it's being held. So My understanding is that basically this says unless a person is granted permission, basically anywhere in the town, alcohol is technically prohibited, with the assumption that it is usually free, the permission itself is usually freely given on private property. Is that a correct interpretation?
Well, it's not alcohol as such. It's an open container.
Okay,
You can walk through the downtown part of Wakefield carrying a bottle of scotch, but don't open it.
what type of scotch?
Well, Chivas Regal is preferred by many.
Okay, we've got it. We've got priorities here. So, you know, we need to know what to be on the lookout for. So if we see Chivas Regal, it's probably being held, it may be held by you. Okay, so open containers are not allowed. Now, what about for events and so forth? What provides the way that for events such as on the common and events inside of town-owned buildings where alcohol is permitted, how does that work in here?
Yeah, you perhaps were on the common for a town day where there was a beer garden. It was a very nice event. Now, that was consistent with this bylaw because the town council, as the custodian of the common, gave permission for the creation of this beer garden within clearly defined boundaries and subject to fairly strict rules.
Okay, and is that also what applies to things such as the other private buildings that are rented out and space in town? So that
Yes.
when there's one day liquor licenses and so forth that
Yeah.
are granted.
Right.
And part of that is just for explanation to people who follow this afterwards. How do people legitimately have alcohol if you're not allowed to have an open container?
So the liquor licenses that are granted by the town council are just for the sale of alcohol. If you're having a private party and you want to allow people to drink, you're free to do that. There's no license necessary.
Okay, and the permission would automatically extend to like the AmeriCal if someone is renting a space in there?
If somebody's renting a space there, then yeah, that's right. But they would need a license from the town council in that case because money is changing hands.
Tom, if I can just jump in, I think they need a license whether or not money is changing hands in the Civic Center, for example. Because I know that if you're having an event there, a baby shower, a birthday party, a political event, you're not charging for the booze, but you still need that license.
Yeah.
Because it's a public
right.
building.
The only public building where you legally can't drink or have alcohol present is a school.
Yeah, we made them get license, the one-day liquor licenses at the Civic Center, and that's hardly ever for selling alcohol. It's just for having guests partake. Yeah, which is a good idea, frankly, I think.
Oh, I think it's a good idea. It's just that if you look at Chapter 138, the trigger isn't the consumption of alcohol; it's the sale. So.
So effectively, the liquor license is serving two purposes, is the way that I'm interpreting it. It serves for the allowance of a sale, and it also, in effect, also grants the permission to have the open container. Because as much as Tom can walk around without a problem with Chivas Regal, if he wants to actually taste it, it will require that it be opened at some point.
I think that's right.
So is that a correct interpretation? Other Others who have questions, thoughts on this? Is there enough confusion that it's driving anyone to need some shivers? Here, I do not have any. Questions, updates, thoughts? Seeing none, moving ahead, chapter 82. Amusements. Silly string. It's funny, but it's no laughing matter. In the sense that silly string can actually be very destructive to a lot of vegetation and can cause a real mess for cleanup. So if you've ever had to clean up silly string, it is an absolute mess. And I know that's part of the reason why this was put into place many, many years ago, where people used to spray silly string, and it has caused a lot of cleanup costs that were effectively unnecessary. So silly string is just basically saying that its use on public property is prohibited. What you do on your private property that you have access to is a whole separate issue.
So Dan, I understand that this was passed originally because of the 4th of July parade. There were marching bands that wouldn't come to Wakefield because vandals with silly string would shoot the silly string into the musical instruments like tubas. And you're right, that creates a huge mess.
And huge messing can destroy an instrument pretty quickly.
Yeah.
So that I do remember when I've seen that in the past many years ago. Fortunately, I haven't seen silly string on public property in town in many years. Questions, thoughts? Shall we leave this one as it is? Stringing along. Chapter 90. Brownsfield's tax abatement agreements. This one, if there's one that is legalese, Tom, I think this is probably the most legalese of the various bylaws. Can you explain what a Brownsfield tax abatement agreement is?
Yeah, I'm really going to have to recommend that we leave this untouched because we passed this bylaw just in order to be able to have tax abatement agreements under the statute that is referenced here, Chapter 59, Section 59A. And the idea is, if you've got somebody who owns property that's contaminated with pollution, you want to encourage them to clean it up. And one way of doing that is to give them a break on their taxes for a period of time contingent on their cleaning up the property during that period.
I think we have used this in the past since it's been enacted, and it's been very helpful as an incentive for businesses to clean up with some little benefit they get, because the cleanup is so expensive. But we certainly have used it to the benefit of the town as a whole, I would argue.
Yeah, I agree.
So there's really environmental cleanup for where there's problems, like if there was an oil spill underground or something along those lines.
Correct, or something even beyond oil. You know, if a building was being developed or was going to be raised, and they discovered something, to give the owner the impetus to continue on with the project and to have some tax abatement, and we get a clean spot.
Okay, any thoughts? Input? This brings us to a different section. One I figure will, and this will keep tonight's meeting short. Streets and sidewalks. If you looked online, unfortunately, the information on E-code is incorrect. I've requested it to be updated. This information that's in chapter 175, sections 8 and 9 was actually superseded in 2018 in May and November. So not quite sure why it was not updated here. I'll bring up text as I found it in the town report. So Eric's attention to detail in town reports, very valuable, because that's where I found the actual language itself.
Dan, while you're pulling it up, one question I had was whether we had asked the Safe Streets Committee for input on this.
I'm not on this particular bylaw. That's certainly a good idea. Okay, let me share what we have here. I apologize for the formatting of this. Again, this came from the town report, which is not always the easiest thing to read. But this was replaced in its entirety in 2018, and then amended in November of 2018, just to correct the name from Board of Selectmen to Town Council. So first question I have, this probably is to you, Tom, is since this doesn't seem to be readily available to residents in any sort of what I'd say is a reasonable way of being aware of it, is it even enforceable in its current state? Is it considered published? You're on mute, Tom.
If there were a violation, I don't think I'd try to go to court to enforce it with a fine. It really ought to be updated, at least on the website. We have books too, but the website for sure should be updated.
Okay, and I mentioned I did request that be done, and I've requested that through the town administrator and executive assistant. So I'm hopeful that that'll get done over the course of the next week or so. Part of the reason for jumping ahead, bringing this up tonight, is just to raise awareness of this issue and figure out who else should be involved in discussions. By our next meeting, whenever that is, it is likely that snow and ice is likely to be an issue. While it has not been an issue thus far this winter, it certainly is likely to become one. And so the purpose of this was redone to accomplish several different goals. The first part really is the responsibility of owners, and it was specifically designed in 2018. We can revisit this as the committee desires, but it was designed to be enforceable for commercial properties, not in multifamily units, not individual homeowners. So if a person has a single home and there's not a business in the home, they're not impacted in a material way by the responsibility for cleanup. But if there's a commercial property, they actually do have a responsibility for cleanup, and the attempt is to be pretty specific. So it's to make sure that commercial multifamily owners, and it's specific to that so that it can be assessed as a lien, that they remove snow, slush, ice from sidewalks, abutting land, so that they're reasonably accessible by all persons, specifically those including elderly, mobility devices, persons using carriages to transport children, and students walking to school. So if you think about who this would impact businesses along Main Street. This would impact businesses along North Avenue. If you've ever seen how some of them do plowing and so forth, they actually block the sidewalks and make it impassable. This is designed to give recourse for that. For commercial properties, and this was actually changed at town meeting in 2018, they have until 24 hours after precipitation stops. So after the cessation of precipitation, that's when they have to make it into a non-slippery condition. So it was originally proposed as 12 hours. It was amended on the floor to be 24 hours. So if snow stops at 8 p.m. on Sunday, they have until 8 p.m. on Monday to get the cleanup without a problem. The idea is that, especially if it happens on a weekend, it may be impractical to get done within 12 hours. So that's where 24 hours is specified, but it's not too long either. Multifamily dwellings, same idea. If there's 4 or more units, then again, they have to do the cleanup. The extent of clearing is that corridors have to be at least 36 inches wide. That's to be compliant for wheelchairs in ADA. And this includes all ramps, regular access points to the street, which would be curb cuts, and entries to the street where a crosswalk exists. Those are the mandatory areas, so you don't have people who block the corner. If a person is on a corner, they actually have to clear the sidewalk areas of getting to the street. That is, again, part of the idea behind this. Penalties, $200 per violation. Every day is a separate violation. So if there's properties that get effectively abandoned and you've got owners who don't do anything, and a week goes by, all of a sudden that becomes $1,400. That might be enough. The town finds it worthwhile to try to collect the money or take a lien on it. The only feedback we got was actually in section F. So in section F, the first part talks about it being part of non-criminal disposition. That way it makes Tom's job a whole lot easier. If he needs to go, he can go to civil court instead of just criminal court on it. And then the section may be enforced by either the Director of Public Works or the police department. And the feedback we got from the police department was they weren't sure if that would require access to the police department ticket books, which would be problematic, or if there would be separate ticket books, separate violations being issued by the Director of Public Works or their designee, which would likely be the supervisors who go around checking different areas, because they would be the ones that know about areas that are not being plowed, because you don't want to have the police who are very busy right after a storm with various things having to go and issue these types of fines. DPW's in the proper position to do it and potentially even do cleanup as necessary. So Tom, I think that question would go to you as to how that would need to work to be compliant with the updates that the governor made for policing and so forth. And again, this hasn't been enforced to date, so I'm not sure how the proper way to do that would be.
Well, I think what you do is make sure that both the DPW and the police have access to appropriate ticket books.
And does that require training for DPW to be able to do that?
Well, I guess minimal, you only have to see it done once to realize what you put on each of the relatively few lines that are on the ticket.
And who would be responsible for making sure that the ticket books are compliant to be enforceable? So once this gets published, who should we ask to make sure that they have appropriate ticket books made?
Well, if we're going to be drafting new ticket books, I'd like to see them before they're printed.
Okay. And ultimately, that's where this is going, especially if the DPW is now having a ticketing function that I don't believe they have for any other purpose. At least not in Wakefield. But this is something that both the police and the DPW had requested. So the other part of this is that if the town has adopted MGL Chapter 40U, which I don't believe we have as of yet, I don't recall offhand, then this would have the ability to go before a municipal hearing officer, and otherwise it could actually be a part of a lien that would go against property taxes if uncollected. Do you know whether the town has moved to adopt 40U?
I thought we had.
Okay.
I think we have to.
Yeah.
So that becomes helpful for enforcement, especially if time goes on, liens can become a very powerful incentive to have property owners take action. Otherwise, you can have other actions take place, as we've already discussed. Go ahead.
I remember when we discussed this and we made changes in the town council, and it isn't as if the DPW will drive down, see a sidewalk blocked and start writing tickets. Like many of other bylaws, they'll talk to the person and tell them that they need to get this cleared. It's only if someone refuses to clear, or in Dan's case, if it's an abandoned property, then they don't clear, that I think this comes into place. I don't know that we've had any violations since we put this into place, but I know there was a good discussion about it. The point about safe streets being included makes sense. I think we had members of State Streets on the town council when we discussed this, but if we're going to talk to Safe Streets, sending something to I'm forgetting the name, Wakefield, Linfield's business people. What's that group?
Chamber of Commerce.
Chamber of Commerce, there it is. Chamber of Commerce. But I think we talked to them as well. So it was collaborative when it was first discussed. So it sounds like maybe how we want to tighten it up could be just making sure that DPW and the police have a mechanism to enforce via a ticket book or some other vehicle if they need to.
Good suggestions. I will take it upon myself to contact the Chamber of Commerce and Safe Streets for feedback on this particular area. In practical terms, I'll wait until it gets published correctly on the website so that people can look at the full correct language. So deposit in public ways, the change that was made for this was the fine was increased to $300. Otherwise, the text is actually the same as it was before. I'll share. $175.9, and this is: you shall not move or remove snow from private lands to public lands. You can move them around on public lands. So moving things from, say, a sidewalk to the space between the sidewalk and the street, that's moving from public land to public land. We can't say move from your driveway out into the street. That's what it's intended to specifically prohibit. And again, if there's a problem, that could be $300. It's $100 for the first offense, second $100 for the second offense, third $100 for $300 for additional. This is aimed really at those people who are blowing snow or shoveling snow into the street, and for plow drivers who are plowing berms and so forth into the streets as well from private land, because those are very real issues. Enforcement for this is exclusive to the police department. DPW is not involved in that. They should be calling the police because that's a much more volatile type of situation.
Is there any, in the new language that you were displaying previously, what about like public or town-owned land. Is there a bylaw to dictating snow removal from that, or is it captured elsewhere?
Tom, are you able to provide any insight into that?
Well, the bylaws don't dictate where on public land the town has to plow. They do dictate what the responsibility of private owners would be.
So is there a responsibility of the town to remove snow from town owned like public ways?
Yeah, on under chapter 84, the town is responsible to remove snow and ice.
Cool. I'm just testing you.
So,
Doing a good job of it.
so the individual homeowners, do I understand this right? Individual homeowners don't have a responsibility to remove snow and ice from the sidewalks abutting their property. It's the town that's responsible for that? Or
Tom,
who's
if you-
responsible
if-
for removing snow and ice from the sidewalks abutting individual homeowners' homes?
So again, there's this statute, chapter 84, that requires the town to remove snow and ice from public ways. And public ways technically include the sidewalks. Now, as a practical matter, we can't begin to clear all of the sidewalks in the residential areas, and we don't attempt to. And most people think of the public way as the place where they drive anyway, rather than the sidewalk.
I'm curious, like I know in Cambridge and Somerville and other towns, individual homeowners do have the responsibility to remove the snow and ice on their individual sidewalks. I'm curious sort of why that's not the case here, if you know about the history.
Well, you could do that. And in fact, I think this bylaw used to require all abutters of these named ways. But now I believe it's limited just to commercial ones.
Dan, can you show the other language again?
It should be shared right now. 178, 175-8.
No,
The-
the new,
Oh, the new language? Sure. That I can do. So
I missed that in the rereading, but so Catherine, thank you for clarifying that. But
so
that does seem like a shift from the like currently published language.
it is absolutely a significant shift. It was done with intention by the committee 5 years ago for two reasons. One, it was very specific streets, some of which were apparently schoolways and old schoolways in some cases for schools that no longer are active, and it had an inequality of requirements based upon where you lived in town. So some homeowners were required, some were not. It became very specific, and there are a lot of other ways that could be added because they're used by people, and it seemed to be impractical in that way. Part of the discussion, as I recall it, Bob, you were part of those meetings, if you want to chime in here, if your memory serves you as well, is that there was a lot of discussion about should individual homeowners have a requirement to clear the property that they're a part of. And part of the discussion is, for some people, that is impractical, and then that would subject them potentially to fines. It meant that for people who lived in cul-de-sacs and other areas, that there would be a requirement to clear it even when there may not be people there. So we said that over time, and this is certainly 5 years have passed, even though this may not have been fully published, that we could move towards enforcing more clearing by homeowners. It could even be a different timeline that would be a requirement for homeowners to clear the sidewalks, especially as there is now a push to build more sidewalks. So that's something that could certainly be done. But the rationale was 5 years ago was that it seemed politically imprudent to go to town meeting and try and say, okay, we're now going to have this new requirement. And by the way, you can get fined up to $300 for not doing it. So since all of that was a change at that time, it seemed politically unlikely to be well received.
Yeah.
So I would, oh, sorry, I think Bob was about to talk. Go ahead, Bob.
Sorry, I was just gonna add, my recollection is we spent as much time on this particular bylaw as we did any other bylaw in the entire 3 years that we existed. We had a presentation made. I don't remember if it was from the fire chief, but he came in with what they were doing in Brookline, I think, or Arlington. We spent a lot of time with serious discussions about whether we should say that homeowners have the responsibility to do the clearing. And I agree with Dan about the political side of it. And we went forward with what we thought we could get through town meeting with. I also think, and Tom, correct me if I'm wrong, isn't there still under Massachusetts, not general law, but Massachusetts statute, judicial law, that homeowners are liable if they don't clear their sidewalks? There's some liability if somebody gets injured.
No, that would only be with respect to their property itself. And the if you say fail to shovel your front walk and somebody slips on the walk, then it's possible that they could successfully sue you.
All right, but I do remember we spent many sessions on this particular bylaw.
I don't mean to drag up something that you all spent a long time 5 years ago dealing with, but I will just say that as a parent who tries to walk their kids to school as often as possible, a lot of people do not clear their sidewalks, including on pretty main streets, and it puts me and my kids in a really unsafe position on a regular basis in the winter. And so I think there's a case to be made for finding some way to encourage residents to clear their sidewalks.
I will say though, having where I live in the corner of a cul-de-sac. And with that being said, the town, they use the corner of where I live in front of my house to leave the snow. So I am one of those residents where it is physically impossible, regardless of I have a snow blower, for me to move the mound of snow from the corner. So even with that, who's responsible for removing that? The city? Do I call them in to have that? So being a resident and having the city block that or being responsible for that, physically impossible for me to do that. I would have to hire people to remove that snow. And I guess the argument would be where would you put it? You know, where would you put the snow? Where would the city put the snow? Or the town, I should say. But being a resident, that directly impacts me when they put the snow on that corner.
Yeah. Lisa, I think you could call DPW and ask them to shift it. It is a problem when we have huge storms, but if it's impacting your safety, getting in and out of your town, I think they would be responsive. I've found them responsive in the past. To Catherine's point, I think this town would be resistant to having individual homeowners shovel. That said, is there another way to incentivize or a campaign? Can we publicize it, do a little bit better publicizing to make sure that, especially if you live on a walkway to school, as I do, I know the neighbors in my neighborhood are really good about clearing the sidewalks because we know kids walk there. I don't have kids walking to school, but I'm still doing it. So I think maybe can we go at it a different route and maybe ask DPW or the police to do something a little more public to not shame people into it, but to talk about how important it is. Because I don't think this town's going to vote to make it private people liable. I could be wrong, but I'm just not, I don't think so.
That's what we thought back in 2018.
Yeah, I know my town a little too well, I think.
Because Massachusetts general law gives towns permission.
Yeah.
To have a bylaw to require the removal. So the mechanism's there from a legal standpoint, chapter 85, section 5, but yeah, I just think that our thoughts back then was it was going to be too difficult to get it passed at town meeting.
And is it just a resource issue to consider like town responsibility?
For all the sidewalks, I think yes.
Yeah, or even like upon request. I know that's like a whole process that then requires administration and more resources, but like, was that something considered?
I think if it's a well-walked sidewalk that's getting to school or to a bus, the DPW would certainly listen with regard to whether or not that could be cleared. Our sidewalk does have the little sidewalk plow guy come down because we're on a hill heading to a bus stop. So even though we all shovel, we have them come in, do a little, make it smooth because we're at the bus stop. So I bet you could ask. They might say no, but they also might say yes. I think that's a good idea, but I do think there's nothing wrong with us trying to advocate for letting the town know that people need to do their responsibility. Be a good neighbor.
Catherine, the only other final note I had is when we convened as a bylaw review committee, it was only a year and change after the 110 inches in 2015. Happened to be my first winter here in Massachusetts. And I think there was a lot of discussion of you can't enforce having people plow the sidewalk when we had 110 inches of snow. Although personally, I agree that we should have people plow the sidewalks. And I was an advocate for that back then when I was on the BRC, but for the reasons we discussed, it was going to be pretty difficult to get that passed at town meeting.
Yep, I hear that. If it's sort of like politically infeasible, it's politically infeasible. It does seem like it, having the law in the books doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be enforced. So when you have 110 inches of snow, there is the town can make the decision about when to send the police down the road to enforce it. But I hear you. If it's not going to get the votes, then there's sort of no sense in moving down that road.
In section C, multifamily dwellings, I'm just curious, what was the rationale to set that at 4 dwelling units instead of 3 or 2?
The rationale, as I recall, is that 4 is typically the cutoff where things are deemed is where things start to be viewed commercially, and individual families will often own a 2-family, possibly even a 3-family, but as soon as you get to 4 or more units, it has a different designation. The other side of it is that 4 or more units is where the town no longer is responsible for trash pickup. So that way, if a person it lives in a building that does not have trash pickup, now all of a sudden they do have a responsibility to make sure that they do have plowing, because they have to already make arrangement for trash and recycling.
Gotcha.
systems that tend to be interconnected, as I've learned through the years. It kind of operates like a body. So the head is connected to the neck, which is connected to the heart, connected to the lung. Town is not all that different in how this stuff works. But that was the rationale, as I recall, as to why it was 4 units. But it could certainly be changed. It could be reduced to 3 units. That would be a viable option. So I definitely am getting the sense that more thought can and should be put into what is appropriate, especially as we get into snow and ice events over the next many weeks, to be aware of that this is the current of what the current bylaw, as you see it on the screen now, actually becomes significant. And if there are changes that you think would help the town, by all means, let's discuss them. Let's try to do what's right. And then as things get advertised, they can get advertised appropriately. There are ways to do some of the advertising. We can certainly request the DPW put flyers into things such as water bills and other things that they mail. We can also request things go in utility bills, because while all property owners get the water bills, most of the residents actually get MDLD bills. So those are handled a little bit differently. And in a lot of cases, especially with multifamily units, it's the responsibility in practical terms falls on the residents more so than the owners, because it may not be an owner who lives on site. So just letting people know that, oh, this is a need, that can become very helpful. So this is one that will certainly come up again. And I encourage each person to talk to neighbors, talk to others in the town and outside of town, frankly. As Catherine noted, in Cambridge and some other cities and municipalities, there are different approaches to handling snow and ice. See what works well, see also what doesn't. This is something that is a really significant quality of life aspect to our town. And it really does impact each of us. So this one you're going to see probably for next few meetings, just so we can get through the comments, make sure that we really vet this and any changes that may be proposed are able to get done. In the meantime, again, I'm going to request that the updates get published properly. Tom, do you think any other publishing is necessary? Because this may be the appropriate time to do it before we have major storms that require plowing.
I'm sorry, any other publishing of what?
Publishing that would be required so that this could be enforceable for the winter that is just starting.
No, I think the most important thing is to update the website, and then if the DPW observes or the police observe anybody violating, we have something to refer them to. And they're not going to resort to fines right away. They're going to give them a gentle nudge. But it is important that that nudge be backed up by something in the website.
And any suggestions on how to notify plow owners and others who may be coming from out of town about some of these requirements? Because that's one of the issues. That's part of the reason why the fines for depositing on public ways was changed from the staggered fines to straight $300 per violation, was because we know there are, especially plow drivers who just plow things inappropriately. Any suggestions on how to increase that notification? Or is that something we should just leave up to public safety to handle?
Yeah, I really wouldn't know how to do that.
Doesn't public safety contract with these independent contractors, so they could provide them with the information upon allowing them to plow our town? Maybe. I don't think any random Joe can come, or Jill can come and plow the town. There has to be some sort of agreement.
Yeah, somebody has to hire them.
Right. So when that's hired, they could be, informed of our
Yeah.
bylaw.
That would be for municipal plowing. I'm more thinking of private plowing. And that, which is where I definitely have seen the violations that can be particularly egregious. So I've got neighbors where the plow will actually scrape the snow off of the driveway and put it into the street. And then create berms and other things that create visual hazards. And you have to wait until spring for those to melt. They eventually do. They go away. What falls from the sky does eventually melteth away. But
I think you can call the police on your neighbor. So it's up to, when the police go talk to the neighbor about whoever they hired and can find the neighbor, I assume, not the, if it comes to that, if it's something that's egregious, it wouldn't just be the private plow. I would assume it would be the neighbor who authorized it.
I honestly don't think that the neighbor is aware of what goes on because they hire a plow and the snow disappears. As exactly how it disappears is often outside of what they can see, especially when it happens at night. I've seen that in many cases. So, but point well taken. I'll contact DPW on this one as well. So again, my recommendation: talk to people, get feedback, see what there is. To Catherine's point, talk to people, see if there is perhaps enough of a groundswell to actually have a requirement to actually have clear sidewalks. And it could be that there's a definition of what sidewalks need to be clear, whether it's just sidewalks that are made out of a concrete or blacktop, or would that also include grassy ways that are commonly used in other ways that are technically a part of the right of way, but may not have a paved sidewalk. And so just different thoughts, and how should things such as what Lisa brought up be handled where it is impassable due to the actions of the town itself, and which is different than private plows, not operating on behalf of the town, but private plow who's moving things inappropriately. So I think that if we can get more feedback, this is something that will be significant for whatever changes, if any, are actually recommended. Other thoughts on this?
And Dan, the only other thing I would add is I did look it up and it was Brookline. And I think it's worth, if people are interested in looking at, you can go to the Brookline DPW website. But what Brookline did was single family and multifamily residents of 4 family units or less have to clear the sidewalk within 30 hours of a storm's end. Commercial properties and multifamily residents of more than 4 families have to comply within 3 hours of a storm's end. So that was the community that came and briefed us back in 2017, 2018. And this was the bylaw that they adopted. It might be worth seeing how this is working in Brookline. How is compliance working? How are people who are elderly or have disabilities complying with it? It's probably worth talking with, one of our other towns and see how they're handling it.
Bob, will you sign up to be a liaison with, say, Brookline and other communities from a town council perspective?
So I get punished because I did some research. Okay. Yeah, no, I'll be happy to contact. I'll contact Brookline.
Thank you.
I would just ask if we can contact, maybe some neighboring towns. I mean, Brookline obviously has, some differences from Wakefield as the green line going through. It's much more dense. So I don't think it's probably the most similar town to Wakefield as a Stoneham, Melrose, etc. So I think it'd be good to kind of look at some different towns as well.
So along those lines, Tim, which towns would you like to contact the DPW of? You want to pick a couple? We'll spread the work around.
Sure, I will.
So for which towns? And we can have others as well.
I'll look at Stoneham and Melrose.
Okay, excellent. Do we have others who are willing to contact other towns?
No one's gonna say a word to you anymore, Dan.
Oh. Given that I raised this concern, I'm more than happy to contact a couple of towns. I don't know, Woburn,
Or Reading, I think would be a great town.
Reading. Yeah, okay.
More like us. Yeah.
Yep, I'm happy to contact Reading.
So between Tim and Ann, I'm hopeful that all of this is documented as to who's taking on which responsibilities, because we are, sharing the responsibilities.
Yes.
Tom gets lots of updates, so he gets to write up everything in the end. But otherwise, people sharing responsibilities, awesome. Other thoughts?
Bob, I was just gonna ask where the push came from previously around trying to change it, or like the presentation on Brookline. Who did you say was doing that?
I don't know if I still have my notes on it. My recollection, Dan, was that the fire chief came and talked to us about snow removal. And he was the one that brought in the Brookline information, but I don't, that's just off the top of my head. That was a number of years ago.
I can't remember whether it was
not.
fire chief or DPW. It definitely came from the town, from one of the town heads, department heads.
Department came and briefed us and had a lot of materials, whether I don't know if I kept those materials. I'll see if I have them. But I do remember the town department came and briefed us with a lot of very worthwhile information, including the Brookline information.
In favor of a owner responsibility of clearing sidewalks.
Well, to give us the exploring what other towns were doing.
Got
See
it.
if we wanted to recommend something like that.
And the DPW did request the ability to do the general enforcement because they knew that the police did not have the capability to do it right after a storm. And the police, it was a lack of both the capability and the desire to not get involved when avoidable. So as a matter of prioritization, DPW said their supervisors are out. They know the properties that are problematic, and they can handle that.
Okay, thank you.
There has been a change in DPW since then. And I did hear from Joe Conway, who's now the DPW director. He said he was going to look at the bylaw. I sent him the updates. Have not heard anything further on it. Okay. Great discussion. And this again is the start of a discussion likely to be one that will continue so that we can really massage this componentry to get this one right. Because this is one of those bylaws that when it is enforced, it really does impact our quality of life. And hopefully we won't get 110 inches of snow, because it was not a particularly nice welcome for Bob. And for any of us who were here at that time, it wasn't particularly nice for us either. And I hope that's not the case this winter. But in any event, we want to make sure that the environment is safe for everyone who needs access to the ways of the town. So next up is update on professional assistance. I wasn't sure if there was any further information with Mr. Dabrowski.
So I have emailed to Professor Bobrowski telling him that we want to hire him. We want to use his proposed contract, but we want to revise it to reflect that if the committee desires more visits than those specified in his draft, that we can do so, and either he or one of his people will come out and see us. And we'd like some specifics about how much that would cost, either on a per hour or a per visit basis. I sent that. I haven't received an answer yet.
Thank you. If you can keep bugging him to try and press for an answer and get authorization so that we can get that enforced, that would be helpful. That way we can start the recodification process.
Yes.
Thank you. That brings us to item 6, upcoming dates. So in looking at the calendar, and hopefully everyone got the notes to look at your calendars, our next meeting according to normal schedule, which would be the third Monday of the month, is December 19th, which is 1 week before the Christmas holiday. And at the last meeting, there was a general feeling to not hold that meeting. It tends to be late in the month. And I figured we'll leave this up to the committee itself. We have to have at least 5 members to hold a quorum, but if only 5 members want to hold a meeting, that's still a bit tenuous to hold a meeting as well. The other piece that can factor into this decision is in January. The first and third Mondays of January are each holiday. So the first Monday in January is January 2nd, which is the New Year's holiday observed, and the third is Martin Luther King Jr. holiday. And so we can't use either of those dates. We can technically hold a meeting, but it seems inappropriate to hold a meeting on a state holiday if it's avoidable. And so that would lead the next meeting to be February 6th if we don't hold a meeting in December, which it really is up to the committee. If we want to effectively take a month and a half or 2 months off, we certainly can. The town, will be patient for future updates. It'll give Tom some time to get all of the existing updates into full language for warrants and so forth, so that we can then prepare things for the May warrant. Well, it seems like that's really far off. If we're meeting in February, that's about the right time to start the warrant, to make sure that the warrant articles start to get vetted so they can be approved by early March and submitted to the town itself. So thoughts on first the December 19th date, and then if there's any suggestions for how to handle January. We could potentially meet on a Tuesday if we wanted to change it. I don't recommend that we do the 2nd or 4th Mondays, as the town council is planning on meeting on both of those Mondays. I've already confirmed that with the town administrator. Thoughts?
I'm happy to meet on December 19th.
Yeah, I can do the 19th also.
That works for me too.
I was going to say I was not happy to meet on December 19th, but I certainly can do it.
Yeah, I'd probably second skipping December 19th.
Yeah,
personally.
I just feel like it's so in the middle of the holidays, close to the holidays, and I don't know. We take it off at town council. We took off. I think we had 1 meeting in December. Wow, if that makes us feel better. But it seems like February 4th or whatever date Dan mentioned seems so far away that I don't, maybe one date in January that's not a Monday could make sense. But I'll do whatever the committee would like to do.
I am happy to skip the 19th. I can make it, but I agree with and I think we should meet in January at least once.
Eric, any thoughts on that? Are you able to unmute? Okay, looks like Eric is having some Zoom issues. We are still working to try and get to get hybrid meetings authorized. Right now, there's an issue with the meeting room in Town Hall, which is the reason why we're still meeting exclusively by Zoom at this time. So taking a look at calendars for January. If we're not meeting on the 19th, do we want to try meeting, say, the week of January 2nd, possibly even the 3rd? Which is
What was
Tuesday.
wrong? What was wrong with the second week, the 9th? Is that, what was wrong with that week?
Town council.
Oh, town council, all right. Yeah, second.
Could we
The
do?
third
January?
is fine for me.
I can do the 3rd, yeah.
I'm fine with the 19th and the 3rd, actually, so I'm open to the dates that work.
Third's good.
Tom, are you available?
Yes.
Eric, does the 3rd work for you? If you can give us a thumbs up or thumbs down, January 3rd, Tuesday. You can just put it in front of the camera. Thumbs up. Okay, that works. Lucy,
I can do the 3rd.
Bob, are you available as a liaison?
Yeah, I'm here on the 3rd.
Okay. Joe, does that work for you as well?
Yeah.
Okay. Anyone that I have not heard from on the 3rd? Okay, so what I'm hearing, if I'm reading the Zoom room correctly, is there's pushback on December 19th. While we could get a quorum there, it would be a reluctant quorum, but January 3rd would be a better date. That would, and that would give us a meeting in January, and then we would have a meeting on February 6th. So it would be for at least the months of December and January, just one meeting realistically for each of those months, but not too long of time delay. Because the meeting in January is predicted to be by Zoom, even if there is snow, even if it's not shoveled, you'll still should be able to be there, provided that your utilities are working. Any objections, thoughts? Okay, so if you can plan for your next meeting to be January 3rd, 2023. So for other upcoming dates, please have happy holidays, happy new year. There's lots of different events that are happening around town. Please pay attention to the town calendar. There's some fun things. We just had the holiday stroll that occurred this past weekend. There's some other some really good holiday events that are occurring that support, in a lot of cases, various nonprofits that can certainly use all the help they can get for everything from the Wakefield Food Bank and Food Pantry to other nonprofits that are really helpful. And please make sure that you stay safe as you go into the holidays. We don't need anyone to get particularly sick, get into any accidents. That would not be a good thing. So, any final thoughts from anyone before we adjourn?
Happy holiday.
Going once, going twice. Okay, with that, we need a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Okay, Catherine wants to get out here really quickly and wants to leave as fast as she arrives. So Dan seconding. Okay, with that, gonna do final roll call vote in the order in which you appear on my screen. Catherine,
Yes.
Joe,
Yeah.
Lisa,
Yes.
Kevin,
Yes.
Ann,
Yes.
Tim,
Yes.
Eric, you can do it by thumbs up. That works. It's an indicator. Lucy,
Yes.
Bob, while you don't get a vote, we'll take you that you are actually in support of adjourning and getting some time with Tracy. I vote in the affirmative. So, Tom, if you want to vote on this one, we'll even allow your input as well, even though it's non-binding.
Yeah, I'm always pro adjournment.
Okay, so by all means, with that, meeting is adjourned. Tom, please go ahead and enjoy some good scotch. Just remember, it can't be open in public. So see everyone next year. If you've got feedback in the meantime, please by all means feel free to reach out, and look forward to seeing you all through the holidays and next year. Thank you very much.
See you guys.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Happy holidays.
Have a great